Hello, I'm Peter Corr.
Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Burton, and tonight our topics are going to be food security, the new customs checks coming in at the end of January, and also the increased spending limits for general elections. Tonight I am delighted to welcome our guests, Femi Oluwole and Ms. Webster.
Rejoin Rants.
Femi, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Okay, I'm Femi. I'm a human rights advocate and anti-Brexit campaigner. I basically was working on human rights advocacy in Brussels and Vienna, trying to push back against horrendous human rights policies in EU countries. And then I saw Brexit as a major threat to human rights. I worried about what the Tories would do if unleashed into Brexit Britain in terms of our human rights, and everything they've done since has kind of proven that fear to be correct. So now both an anti-Brexit campaigner and a human rights campaigner.
Excellent. And Liz, could you please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
We farm up in Wiltshire, and Brexit just completely and utterly made me get out into activism because I knew exactly what it meant for food and farming. I hoped that I was exaggerating or being a scaremonger, but sadly, everything I feared has happened and more. It's worse than we thought, and I can't rest until we right the wrong. And so I'm here for the long haul.
Thankfully, thank you.
Thank you. And how is your farm? Has the floodwaters gone down yet, Liz?
No, we've been flooded since October, and we weren't able to get some of our crops in, our maize, because the rain started and everything got too wet. So we've lost a significant amount of money this year. And this is the second time the same happened in 2019, I think it was. So, you know, the way the floodwater works, it all comes in onto the River Thames where we are, and they hold back the water in the Thames to save Oxford and London. So the water levels here just haven't dropped, and we don't expect to dry out until the spring, sadly. So it's very, very squelchy around here.
Our first major topic tonight is food security and these new customs checks that are eventually coming in. 5 times they've been delayed. The same checks that the European Union put in effect on day 1, of course, on their end after the end of the transition period. And this is going to have such a huge impact on British food and imports and things like that. Liz, what are the main issues going to be, do you think, from this? I know that the end of this month, I believe it's medium risk animals that the checks are coming in on, and then it's staged through that. Is that right?
Yes, I'm still not 100% sure that it will actually happen, because I think the results will be so bad that inflation is going to go up, and Sunak has promised to halve inflation or keep reducing it, and there'll be shortages, and you can't imagine why they would want to make their position going into the election even worse, because it's going to be obvious that it's related to these checks. So I'll be very surprised if it happens, but they might have decided, well, let's get this underway. We know that Rees-Mogg has been calling out for hormone-fed meat, and they might think, well, let's cause this food shortages so that we can have a whole load of. We'll have to capitulate on the hormone-fed meat and the low standard imports, and they're already talking about labelling, saying, you know, not produced in the UK, so you know that it's lower standard. I mean, well, that's their offer. Having promised in their manifesto to uphold our high standards, we're now reduced to a label saying it might not be too safe after all. I mean, unbelievable. But it's really difficult to work out. It's like a game of chess with this lot. It could be that Sunak's just promising this to appease his party because he's in a lot of trouble with them and they want to oust him all of the time. I just wouldn't be surprised, if he delays it and then calls a snap election. That wouldn't surprise me, because I think I think he's really on borrowed time with them, and the only weapon he's got is to call a snap election. But I don't know. I hope he does. I hope they don't come in, because I don't want to have low standard food here. And the only solution to this is to align with EU regs and free up trade, which means going back into the single market. And once we're back in the single market, then you go, oh dear, we've got no say on anything. Oh, we need to be a member again. I mean, there is, if they'd actually said in the referendum, do you want to vote to allow a whole shed load of bad, low standard, poisonous food to come in here? I can tell you now, only 10% would have voted Brexit. Because we know all the polling on low standard food. Everybody wants good food. Of course they jolly well do. And we had the best deal. And George Eustace is on record saying that. He actually said, we had the lowest and highest standard food in the Western world because of the competitive market, which successive British governments, with their sovereignty, has been allowed to happen. And it's really, really infuriating.
I mean, I think that they'll be kicked out the door again. I do. I just do not think before an election that the government are going to run. They're not ready. They don't have the staff. They don't have the board of staff.
I think they actually are. The company I work for, as you know, I'm a lorry driver. Does a lot of work with Gist, a big haulage company for the supermarkets, and he seems to think they're coming in this time.
Okay.
But that doesn't necessarily mean it won't be delayed again. But from his point of view, that and he thinks he's ready, but the various companies they work under and with certainly aren't. I can tell you by speaking to people myself. So,
I mean, I was pretty livid when I saw Jacob Rees-Mogg saying they were tit for tat, regulations coming from the EU.
Right.
No. It's
Oh my God.
Brexit, that there's this thing, and then we have that video, I think, from April last year when they delayed the checks again, saying, "Oh, we can't do this. It's going to add on £1 billion to consumers," and really saying that this is a terrible thing. We put these barriers up, which is obviously going to drive inflation, make food more expensive. And of course, what we've seen from the UK side is a huge reduction in small, medium enterprises, exporting to the EU purely because those checks and that paperwork has been there now for 3 years. And when it's reversed, we can expect so many small producers and suppliers from Europe to stop exporting to Britain in the same way. So when you delicatessens, you've got all your meats from all the different European countries and stuff like that. All these smaller suppliers are going to face exactly the same issues, which they haven't done so far when sending products to the UK. So it's going to decrease, choice, quality. I mean, even on that side of things, it's really going to make a big difference. But the fact is, they can't keep bumping these checks down the road. So, what happens if there's a general election, the Tories come out, Labour come in, and then they put in the checks, to then they get all of the bad, reaction from that happening. It's just a really interesting kind of scenario, but we'll just have to wait and see. I mean, it's stages. It's January, end of January, I think June, and then the end of the year. But very, very interesting indeed. The flour suppliers, there was a good article the other day, and I think they said it went from 19 stages for importing flours, which 90% of all flours imported and sold in Britain are imported. Now it's 58 stages to send those flours in. So it's definitely going to stop small businesses export.
But I mean, Jacob Rees-Mogg says that Brexit is all about free trade. Isn't that like the complete opposite Isn't that what the EU is all about? Free trade. And Brexit was about leaving the single market, which means no free trade. He really infuriated me with that tweet, but I won't go on a big rant. Liz, why is it so important? I ask you why. I see you get a lot of comments, you and Femi get a lot of comments from absolute morons on your videos, and it drives me mental. But one thing, every now and then I'll see a question by someone on one of your videos where I don't know the answer. And if I was asked it, I wouldn't know how to answer. And the one for you, Liz, would be why aren't British farmers seeing this as an opportunity to produce more food and make more money if we can't get food as easily from the EU anymore? What would your answer to that be?
Well, as soon as Brexit happened, they kneecapped us. Well, no, actually, let's go back. We've been kneecapped for many years, and it's probably why some farmers voted Brexit, which goes back to what I said about George Eustace, the competitive market. The supermarkets in this country are a monopoly, and they control the prices. And whilst we had BPS, the CAP, it meant that most farmers were able to have some income from that subsidy, because they literally have been forcing the prices down so hard and pushing farms out of business. So you either expand and you basically intensify, or you give up. Or unless you're rich like Jeremy Clarkson and you can afford to produce food just for fun. But ultimately, that's where we've been going. So we were already kneecapped, and then when Brexit happened, and of course it coincided with COVID, and they kept making all of these false promises that they would do this and they would do that, but ultimately they've pulled the rug from under our feet. And they promised that they would continue to match the subsidies. They haven't. We've got an unfair market even within the UK. English farmers are by far worse off because the devolved nations are still subsidising food. So it's an absolute mess. And many farmers are committing suicide. And what drives me absolutely potty about Remainers is that all they can say is, well, you all voted for it, so you deserve it. And it's just the same mentality of people who blamed everything on the EU. And they will not have it that farmers aren't all some massive block who all go to the polling booth together and vote the same damn thing. That some people voted Brexit because they were misled. And in this whole thing of like, reap what you sow, it's kind of like, I mean, both of my GPs voted Brexit. And the only reason I know is because they assumed I voted Brexit because we farm. And they said, oh, we voted Brexit as well. Nobody said, all those doctors voted Brexit. They voted Brexit for the £350 million a week. And what is happening is that our food is being removed. We're handing more control to global corporations, which in my book is feudalism, and we already have it with our rivers. You're paying, you're held to ransom with your water. You have to pay what they demand, and they can just put shit in the river and poison you. And that's exactly what's going to happen with our food and with our healthcare. And that's what we're fighting. And the only way we're going to win is by uniting and bringing everyone on our side. And we're not going to do that if we keep going around saying, you voted Brexit, you reap what you sow. I just wish Remainers would stop doing that.
I really hate that about the Remain movement myself. You see it regularly. I mean, we get it. I'm going to say I'm a British migrant living in Spain. And we get, oh, most of you voted for Brexit. It's utter bullshit. You know, it's from what they've read in the Sun and the Daily Mail. Vast majority, we don't know. But what we do know is that the vast majority of people living in Europe are pro Remain. It's that when Cornwall loses funding, you get even Remainers, well, they voted for it. No, they didn't. Some of them did, half of them did, half of them didn't. And I know farming.
But even if they did, we've got to change their minds, and we're not going to change their minds if we keep going.
This kind of, oh, they let them suffer, they voted for it. When no, 100% of no one voted for Brexit. It was always around 50-50, some constituency, obviously up to 69-70%. But this is something that really annoys me, and it annoys me because it comes from Remainers quite a lot. And I think, you're happy to see people suffer just because of the way they voted, and that to me is just a no-go. Absolutely dreadful. You, Femi.
That said, I did find it amusing when Liz mentioned that only 10% would vote to have poisonous food, and I'm sure that if that 10% would make their way onto a BBC panel host, so pretty much the entire casting call for BBC question time. The other thing you said was that smaller exporters in the EU would struggle to sell to the UK under the new checks that are coming in, and that's kind of a major problem, because the Bank of England, when they were talking about the fact that Brexit has caused inflation to get worse, one of the things they mentioned was that because of the additional trade barriers between the UK and the EU, it means that smaller businesses have struggled to sell across the borders. And because those smaller businesses are no longer doing that, that then means there's less competition, and less competition means the larger companies are therefore able to raise their prices because they're not going to have anyone to compete against. So when these new checks come in, it won't just have the problem of increasing costs; it'll have the problem of increasing costs, and there'll be nobody to compete against. So it will actually increase costs twice over.
Yeah.
And in terms of the politics of this, you were talking before about, do we know whether or not the Tories are actually going to go through with the start of import checks on the 31st of January? And from a political standpoint, it's a double-edged sword. When you lose, heads you lose, tails I win. Because if they don't do these checks, if they don't actually start doing the checks, then they will have delayed the actual full implementation of Brexit in an election year. So having won the previous election on a promise to end all the delays, on a promise to thwart all of the Remainers that were constantly saying, no, we can't do Brexit because it'll cause all this damage, they treated them as the enemy. They'd have done the exact same thing in the same year while going into the next election. Refused to get Brexit done.
Absolutely.
But Femi, there's still a lot of people out. There's still a lot of people out there that think we haven't done Brexit, and they think we haven't. They go, we haven't left. And I say, well, where do you think we were going to go? I mean, and what is extraordinary is those people that say, okay, well, why didn't you just go and live in Panama or wherever you want to be? Why? Where exactly? And what exactly do people think? Really, for sure, Brexit, there's lots of different things about freedom of movement and our rights and everything else. But the biggest catastrophe of Brexit is food. And food is linked to your health. You are what you eat. And we escaped feudalism in this country in 1846 when the Corn Laws were repealed. Up until that point, everybody was held by the local baron, and they had to do as they were told. They either worked in the house or they worked on the land, and that is where we're headed back to. And people think they're taking back control. It's a joke.
It is a joke. Liz, can I ask you, do you never feel like taking a tractor down to Downing Street and dumping a pile of shit in front of Parliament? Like, can we not get a bit of this militant farmer going like the French or the Germans have? You know what I mean? I mean, it's...
Oh, I do that every Friday night.
We take contractors to London. We have done it, but there's strict rules on us, and that's the other thing. Farmers are very tightly controlled in Britain. And I don't know if you know about this, but there's been a couple of high-profile cases recently with farmers being prosecuted by the Environment. The Environment Agency doesn't do much about floods, but if a farmer steps out of line, they're the first to be prosecuted. And one farmer recently, he had done some things wrong. Don't we all do some things wrong sometimes? But he committed suicide. And when you think about what the river, what's happening in the rivers and the water companies are doing, it's so unfair. But I think there's a level of real fear within the farming community. They also, I think it was last April, they changed the tax rules for red diesel. Red diesel means you pay less tax on it.
Yeah.
And if we are outside of 5 miles of the zone of your farm, with red diesel, then you're breaking the law. So nobody wants to break the law. Nobody wants to go and flush out their tractor of red diesel and put white diesel in. I mean, that's jolly expensive. So and a lot of hassle. So that's why you haven't seen the protests happening. Plus, there's a lot less farmers in Britain now. There's under 100,000 because of the way that that they've. It's almost as if they've been planning this for some time, I think, if I look back on it, because they have been literally reducing the number of smaller farms in particular have gone out of business and amalgamated and got bigger or got out of business. And it's maddening because most smaller farms produce more food than the big farms. So
yeah, it's maddening. One thing I noticed here in the EU, like you were saying, the supermarket monopoly in the UK is a really significant player in the cost of food and driving down constantly the price of food. We don't get that so much here in the EU. When you go to the shops here, your fruit and veg varies in price throughout the year. And if you know that, when it's cherry season here, it's unbelievable. You can buy, 2 kilos of cherries for like £1.99, £2.99. But then when it's not cherry season, they're either not around and then one week you can go to buy vegetables and they'll be slightly dearer. So there's this flux allowed for prices, for shortages and things like that, and seasonal product. Whereas in Britain, the competition between supermarkets, I believe, has really, really hurt the farming community because of that drive down on prices, particularly on milk and dairy and things like that. It's
yeah, it started with Alec Douglas Home, who in 1963 it was, when he got rid of the retail the price fixing, so that the middle people were not allowed to pay less than the cost of production, and that's when it began. And that was when Tesco was born, around that time. So and then Margaret Thatcher made it worse by getting rid of the Milk Marketing Board and all of these organisations which protected food production, because after the war we understood that we needed to have food. And it's almost as if they want to create a food crisis, in my view. It just doesn't make any sense. But
I do believe in.
Anyway, most people don't understand that food comes from farms. They think it grows on supermarket shelves. So
yeah, that's true. I've lived on a farm myself. My ex-father-in-law farm in Scotland, so I'm quite in touch with the land myself. And one day I hope to live on one again.
Well, I learnt everything I know about food from that film called Sausage Party. Have you all seen it? That's based
I
on.
haven't seen it, but I know the one you're talking about.
It's based on a true story, isn't it? I think.
I think so. I think it was a Dickens novel.
Yeah, a Dick novel.
Yeah. So what's the solution? Just rejoining the EU. Is that the best solution?
The solution is to push a cart that is already heading the right way, but it's going to need some nudges. That is that when Keir Starmer takes power, he's going to be looking at a country that has been through repeated economic disaster for 14 years. He's going to be thinking, all right, my best way of staying in power is if I appear to be the person who has improved people's quality of life. And he's going to have a bunch of levers in front of him. And as far as I can tell, there is only one lever marked improve economy by 4%. There's only one lever marked improve our access to food. There's only one lever marked significantly improve labor shortage situation. And that is the single market. Now, it's not as simple as flipping a switch, but once we say to the EU, we intend to fully rejoin the single market, and that means agreeing to all the rules of the single market, agreeing to the jurisdiction of the EU court, agreeing to free movement, then that will create the goodwill that is required to get, at the very least, some intermediary agreement that we will allow the free flow of goods again, and then we can gradually get back in.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, Femi, because You speak about the single market a lot, and I know that you're qualified and studied EU law, but I've seen other people question whether we can just join the single market. They say that we're too big a company, and the group of countries that are in just the single market are a lot smaller than us, so would actually say no to us joining that group of countries. What would you say to that?
So joining the EEA, joining EFTA, those are specific organizations, specific groupings. What we had after we voted to leave, we in inverted commas, was the EU offering us several different deals, including essentially being in the single market, i.e. Alignment of rules, mutual recognition of standards, those sorts of things. Now, that's the sort of deal that the EU could do as a trade deal, i.e. mutual recognition of standards. The UK agrees to the rules of the single market. And as have you seen with like Switzerland, they have a whole bunch of separate deals that basically put them in the single market, even though they're not quite there. So that sort of thing could be what we could do in the interim, and we could gradually move away towards something more formal, ultimately ending up with us rejoining the EU.
Yeah, and you know what? It's in the EU's interest to hope that we do this, because of the risk of the bad food with Northern Ireland. Whilst we've got the Windsor Agreement there, it's not great. And so in many ways, if you just sort of say, we need to align with Northern Ireland and get rid of this border, it's actually just a different way of looking at it. And Theresa May's deal was largely permanent transition, wasn't it, Femi? That's all it was, really. It was there as in, we can diverge if we want to, but it's actually impossible to do so. And that's how we ended up with the most extreme Brexit, really, her trying to appease her party. But I can see that the European Union would want to get rid of the risk of all of this poisonous stuff coming through, because it's cataclysmic, and it will flood through without a doubt. And we've already got problems with honey because it's being adulterated by the Chinese here. And you know, it's just those sort of products that once they start to leach through to the European Union, they'll be fighting fire the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, the labelling just now on food list, this not for EU. Now, I know that's all to do with Northern Ireland, so it can cross the border. But the fact of the matter is that suppliers and producers are now going to have two sets of labelling, and packaging, which is hugely, expensive. So are they going to make that effort to have not for sale in the EU and for sale in the EU? This is something, I believe that so far standards haven't changed that much, apart from some pesticides are now allowed to be used in Britain that are not to be allowed in the EU.
No, it's not that. It's because the European Union have gone further in making changes to certain pesticides. And so it's not that we've changed and deregulated, right. It's more that they've gone ahead and made some changes. But deregulation could happen with a flood, and that's the only, as in an emergency, as we had with COVID, there was an emergency, there was a shortage of PPE. Oh, wallop, in it comes a whole load of rubbish. Most of it they ended up burning, as we know. So they could be wanting to cook that sort of scenario. I don't know, but it doesn't make any sense to do that in an election year to me. But anyway, we'll have to wait and see what comes forward. But the labelling it's a nightmare, and all industry is up in arms about it. Our biggest manufacturing industry is food and drink, and everyone just keeps carrying on, either in some zone of, oh, I'm bored of Brexit and I don't want to talk about it, and it's just maddening, really. And just think, why is no one saying, well, goodness, why is this not what I voted for? But I don't know. It is incredible how placid the British people are.
Yeah,
I think they are, Liz, but the politicians aren't. It's what made me cross about Ed Davey when he came out a few weeks back and said that people aren't talking about Brexit on the doorstep. But then he goes on to talk about what they are apparently talking about. And you realise every single thing they're talking about is, if not caused by Brexit, made worse by Brexit. So if I was Ed Davey stood on the doorstep and someone something clearly connected to Brexit, I would tell them, do you think Brexit has had an effect on this, or do you think this is because of Brexit? But he isn't doing that, and that really infuriates me. It's just almost like they're letting it just go. I mean, that's why we set up National Rejoin March in the first place, because we felt like everyone was giving up and going home, and we weren't having it. So it's that kind of thing
maybe it's because he needs maybe it's because he needs his officials to tell him what to do, because he didn't know what to do about the post office dilemma, because he wasn't told what to do, and it seems to me that's the issue. Everyone I speak to, if you prod deep enough, they talk about Brexit. Everyone, including people that voted for it. And I'm sorry, it's not true that people are not speaking about it. And since when do you, as a leader of a political party, say I'm not going to talk? I mean, no one was talking about tuition fees, I'll tell you. And yet the Lib Dems were offering to get rid of tuition fees, even though no one was really talking about it. This is about values, and there's nothing more important than making sure that we live in a free and fair country. and the only way we can do that is by being in the European Union.
I think we need to be as essentially aggressive as we could possibly be on this point, which is that if you think that Brexit doesn't matter, you do not care about working class people. Because if you know that Brexit is increasing food prices significantly, if you know that Brexit is damaging our economy, if you know that Brexit is the reason why the UK government is lacking £40 billion that could otherwise be spent on helping people out of poverty, and you don't care about it, congratulations, you're one of the elite kind of people that Brexiteers supposedly were voting against. So there's that. There's also the principle of why I'm hopeful that things will get better in this sense is we have to be focused on this principle of there will be no more excuses after the election. Everybody who's currently saying Keir Starmer can't do this, Ed Davey can't say this because the Tories will crucify him, the Daily Mail will crucify him, those excuses disappear at some point within the next few months. All gone. So everybody within Labour Party, everybody within the Lib Dems, if they actually care about the future of the UK and actually care about achieving the progress that the majority of the country wants to see, they will be on our side fully, because it is necessary. And we can just bluntly say, if you are in power and you've seen the Tories are gone, they no longer have power, and you're looking at the lever to pull to get us back in the single market, to say, all right, let's try and improve our economy significantly after a population that has been financially starved for the better part of a decade and a half. If you aren't willing to achieve that kind of progress, what the fuck is the point in you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because the Tories aren't going to do it.
There's no honesty. That's what you feel like. It's like no one's talking about the elephant in the room. I know it's often referred to as that, and it's this within the politicians, just absolutely no honesty about the root causes of what's wrong in Britain, and the fact that there is this very simple solution. And we already know from polling, the vast majority of the British public now would support being in the single market. When you frame freedom of movement the right way, the vast majority of people, if you say, do you think British people should be allowed to travel and work freely across the UK, it's about 79%, it's Omnis's poll. If you say, should there be mutual freedom of movement between EU citizens for work and British people, it's about 74%. So it's the way you frame the question. And I just don't believe that freedom of movement is as toxic as people make it out to be, as our politicians make it out to be. And I personally would love to see more and more people really standing up and speaking about the benefits of freedom of movement and the loss of freedom of movement. It's obviously it's not just people, goods, services, capital.
When you think about it, the vote Rees-Mogg said that there should be two votes. There should be one at the beginning to start the negotiations, and then one at the end once the negotiations are finished. But what we ended up with was a vote at the beginning to kickstart the negotiations, and that the vote at the end was actually a general election. Only 43% of people voted for Brexit. This is Femi's favourite line, you know. So if there'd been a referendum at that point, I think it probably would have been really quite a big majority for Remain, because nobody liked the deals anyway.
Nigel Farage
said it.
Yeah, you say it, Femi. I was just going to say the same thing I think you were going to say. But Nigel Farage said exactly that. If there was another referendum, Remain would win it every time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And I think it's true. But I mean, for me, freedom of movement doesn't really affect most people I speak to, as in I've been on 2 foreign holidays in 20 years, for example, and most people I know haven't been abroad ever. So freedom of movement in that way doesn't affect them. A lot of DJs and musicians I know, it affects them because they can no longer do their tours around Europe unless they've already got a lot of money, which is another scene devastated by Brexit. But I think when it comes to freedom of movement, you've got to think about thinking about a different way of connecting it to people's lives. So it affects inflation because of the extra costs with imports and exports, and inflation affects literally everyone because everyone goes shopping, don't they, and buy stuff. And the sectors like hospitality or logistics, the driver shortage, which meant us drivers have to do longer hours to make up for them shortages and stuff like that, which a lot of drivers are really pissed off about. I think we need to connect it in different ways rather than necessarily just talking about things that might only affect, dare I say it, people with more money.
I agree. I try and argue freedom of movement all the time, and people say, well, hardly anyone ever used it, you know. And I'm like, you know, I'm from the Rhondda Valley's working class background, grew up in a council estate, and I'm the only person in my family, in my community, that I know who's taken advantage of freedom of movement. And like you say, the odd holiday here and there, it doesn't connect with most people. But the really, really sad thing about it is that now you can only move to the EU if you're in a really good job, and then you can find a job, and you know, you go for visas, which are complex and lengthy and stuff like that. And that one employer, you can't just move to the EU to look for work. And you know, for a pensioner on a state pension, you can't retire now here. Minimum income is €2,400. I mean, a state pension is just over €1,000. So really, it's the people who are at the low income workers, minimum income workers, you know, retirees on state pensions or low incomes. These are the people. It doesn't affect the people who are wealthy. You can get a non-lucrative visa. You can jump through hoops. Yeah. It's taken about 10 months even at the moment there for Spain. So it's still not an easy process. So it's just, and Brexit has just stripped away even more opportunities from our youth, from the people who are disadvantaged anyway. And I would just like to see people speak up a bit more boldly about it.
I think the real thing we should feel hopeful about is that there is no party campaigning for Rejoin, and the figures are already huge. Yes. You know, Brexit before the campaign, I don't know, I can't remember what the polling was, but it was pretty low. Nobody was interested in it. But now, without even a campaign, without anyone really talking about it, it's hovering between 57 and 63%.
That's a very good point.
Mm-hmm. And once the campaign starts, you know, we're going to be looking at probably getting close to 80%. And that's why I am angry about the Lib Dems not doing what they should be doing. And they should be offering an option to get us out of this mess and sticking with values. Charles Kennedy benefited hugely from his stance with the Iraq War. And that is, we were right. You know, you've got everything to gain electorally by saying, you know, guys, we were right. And it is just dreadful that the majority are being ignored. And it really goads me, especially when you hear this stuff about the post office and these victims, that it's the same thing, isn't it? Nobody's listening to the people. And it's time that we were heard. So we need, we need, and we did have the People's Vote campaign, which was loud and was heard, but it seems to have, that momentum seems to has fractured somewhat, and it needs to come back.
Yeah.
That's
just going back briefly to the freedom of movement point. In terms of the effect of freedom of movement on working class people, there are a couple of things to point out. There's one, the fact that NHS. So we're talking 5% of the UK population is from an EU country, yet they make up EU citizens make up 10% of the UK's doctors. There's the issue of the fact that for the past 4 years we've seen labour shortages across their economy, and people have known that that's making food prices go up. I mean, we saw literally shortages of Nando's wasn't able to get chicken, McDonald's wasn't able to get into our economy. In terms of us going that way, in the UK, going to university is £9,000. In France, it's free.
Yeah.
As far as social mobility goes, the ability to get yourself a degree is significantly easier if you've got free movement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know, if you're a British young person living in the EU now, so my two kids were brought up here, they went to uni on EU fees, home fees. After 27, if you're a British person, you've been living in the EU, so been brought up in Spain with your family, international fees will apply for you if you want to go back to study at home. 26,000 a year. So even if you're a British citizen. So we've got a little leeway in that under the withdrawal agreement, but yeah, that's from 2027. It's just absolutely ridiculous, absolutely awful.
So I asked Professor John Curtis, the polling guru. I mentioned to him what you said a moment ago, Liz, about the fact that the polling for Rejoin Rejoin, not just against Brexit, but actually Rejoin, is nearly 60% and has been for a long time now. And that is without a mainstream Rejoin campaign. And he agreed with that totally and said that would only increase with a mainstream Rejoin campaign. So I think it's a really good point, and that's a point I keep banging on about, is the fact that we've got the media basically mostly ignoring the idea of rejoining the EU. We've got all the politicians deliberately trying to avoid even speaking about it. So that's why it's important that I think people like us are doing what we're doing. And that's why, we're doing a march in London every year and loads of stuff in between it. And we're not going to stop talking about Rejoin. A lot of people say we shouldn't be talking about it yet because we might put Labour at risk and get the Tories back in. But I don't see that, to be honest. And I just think it's important that we are doing what we're doing and we don't shut up and we do keep building. And that's what we are doing with National Rejoin March, really, isn't it, Lise?
I do think that if we did have another referendum, there would be a huge majority for Remain, and not only because the public would have changed their minds and there would have been a campaign. I just think so many people voted for Brexit who had never voted before, and I'm including many of my own family members in this. They were really motivated to vote, and they wouldn't vote. They would not turn up to vote a second time. So I think that actually the majority would be probably much higher than that 60-70%. I think, it could be quite huge. So anyway, shall we move on to our next topic? So as there's a lot of chat just now about an upcoming general election, I found it very interesting that the Conservative government sneaked through this little amendment bill at the end of November to increase the spending limits on elections. Now it's gone up 80% to £35 million. Now, okay, you may say that's fine, but the problem is none of the other parties have a choice in this. It was never brought to Parliament, and of course, it's the Conservatives who are going to benefit from this because they are the people who raise the most money. And for me, the worry around this is already we've heard Rishi Sunak is spending more than Trump on social media. There was an article out the other day. And this will allow a hugely increased spending allowance for digital and social media adverts in every constituency. And I'm really worried that we'll have that kind of same messaging, almost psychological warfare messaging that we had during the Brexit referendum. And it's just another way of cheating, really. And I'm wondering what you guys were thinking about it and your thoughts on it, and if you think it's going to make a difference.
So it is on the one hand terrifying. On the other hand, the reason why the Brexit and Cambridge Analytica stuff, or the reason why that stuff actually was effective was because people were having those conversations behind closed doors in back alley Facebook groups, and people were being accessed without any real avenue to challenge the narrative that they were hearing. I think the way you challenge that is by making sure that we don't let anybody be out of the conversation. We make sure that we reach absolutely everybody we can and have those conversations and keep like things like the video of Rishi Sunak saying that he's proud that he defunded deprived urban areas in favor of rich ones like Tunbridge Wells. That video being everywhere should act as a good antidote to anything that he tries to pump out on Facebook.
Yeah. I mean,
I mean, my own view is I think that, you know, he's I don't know if you saw the video of him yesterday in that oh God, I can't remember the place where the football Accrington Stanley, and he was going around in circles. It's amazing he didn't fall over with dizziness.
very strange.
I think that I think his view of himself as a politician is overinflated and quite delusional, and completely out of touch with British values. And it was Boris Johnson that managed to get that connection together with Farage. They worked together, and they don't have it now. Nobody's touching those chords really. And that's why I think they're worried about reform growing, and we have to watch and see what reform does as to whether they really do carry out their threat and stand candidates in every seat. But I think it's highly unlikely for them to make, even if they spend billions. I can't see them winning the next election. Would you agree, Femi?
I'd say never, because essentially the reason why things are as they are is because Keir Starmer's mostly kept his head down. But the thing is, by keeping his head down and sounding borderline Tory, he risks alienating the Tories alienating his traditional voter base. And if he does that alongside whatever big piece of propaganda the Tories are holding on to until election, it could be dangerous. So it's going to be about
the bacon sandwich movement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's going to be about tactical voting.
Currently, there's more rules and regulations around advertising toilet roll than there are political advertising. I mean, that's basically how it stands in Britain. And the elections bill was supposed to tackle security, accessibility and transparency, and was said it was going to include digital imprints on all social media adverts and things like that. What I would like to say is on this podcast, what we want to do where possible is compare policy between Britain and the EU. And the European Union it's not passed yet, but it should be in place before the May elections. And it's clamping down on political advertising. So this is to specifically stop foreign influence, mainly Russia. And it will bar third country entities from sponsoring political adverts in the EU in 3 months before an election or referendum. And everything will have to have a label on it, saying how much it was paid for it, who paid for it, and it has to take into account right of privacy. So there will be a total prohibition on using certain types of micro-targeting, so using personal data, ethnicity, sex, religion, origin, things like that. There will be a database for online political adverts, which will consolidate all of the information about online adverts and make it really accessible for people to look at and to see. And while it's not perfect, nothing is, but it just shows you the difference where we've got the EU really trying to get a grip of what's coming with political adverts, especially with foreign influence, AI, and spending, compared to the UK, who are just on this real go fast track of using political advertising based on data and micro-targeting. So it would be good if we were part of the EU, because we would be signing up to that as well. But that's not going to happen.
It is going to happen. What you want about, Lisa? Of course it's going to happen.
Eventually. Not yet. Not yet.
Well, I just think that the rules actually on organisations like us, and probably yourself with say British Farming and other campaigning groups, seem to be more strict on us than they are the actual political parties at times.
Yeah.
Which is that the spending limits for certain I think it's £15,000. If you spend over that in a year, it has to be declared. Any donation over 1,500, I think, has to be declared. And that's little organisations like us. And I mean, I'm worried about, with the March this year being possibly pretty close to the election, who we have on a stage and whether we're going to interfere with their funding, and whether the funding for the March could be included in, say we had a Labour politician on stage, for example, would we have to put whatever money we raise for the March into Labour's spending? This is all stuff.
Well, you're
we've
okay
got
if you invite all of the parties, aren't you? That's the answer.
Yeah, but if they all don't come, that might be where we do invite all the parties, but if they don't all come, then that's where the problem might lie. For example, we had Gina Miller on stage at the last one, who's leader of True and Fair Party. We were okay at the moment. Like I said, I had a meeting with the Electoral Commission, and what we're doing so far is okay. But I think if we're doing this one close to an election, I think we're going to have stricter rules put on us than Rishi Sunak on Twitter, which is just mental.
But what date are you thinking of for the next March then?
Well, we're looking at, I can't say the date because we're not allowed to announce it publicly until we've booked it, and we can't book it until 6 months before. But we are looking at sort of mid-October to try and avoid that party conference season. And if it's mid-October, we're possibly 3-4 weeks before an election, which may or may not be a problem. I don't know yet.
I just can't see how he hangs on until October.
Oh,
I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't see how that he can keep the discipline going in that party.
I hope you're right. I really hope he does do it in May, because that'll completely clear us up for what we're doing. Plus, it'll be 6 months less of this Tory party.
Could even be April. I mean, there's no reason why it couldn't be. So he's got the advantage of being able to call the election when he wants. If I'd been in his shoes, I would have called an election after the coronation, and I think he probably had a much better chance then of hanging on to power. But anyway, but of course Gordon Brown agonised over, should I go or should I not? And every new prime minister knows that they've got that sort of honeymoon period, and that's when they should make the most of it. So
that's the problem. The longer he hangs on, the more likely
the
to
worse
make
it
mistakes,
gets,
isn't it? Yeah, he might do, like when Gordon Brown called that woman who was a bigot, and got him done over. Ed the bacon sandwich wrong. Anything could happen. It's ridiculous. It's mental, isn't it? Really, it's mental. Anything can happen.
They've also increased the political parties' declared donations to 11,180. Used to be so you can declare, and like you say, you'd have to our threshold is much lower than that. But on the digital imprints, I think they have backtracked, because there was a report, and I think it was by Lord Putnam, and he said, I think I put it out here, he said, who worked on the report, he said, the Tory digital team don't want to be regulated because they want to be able to lie. They want a license to lie. They are not trying to increase participation and are putting in policy to make it easier for them to win. So,
yeah, well,
you know,
we saw what they did in Boris Johnson's old seat, didn't we, with the ULEZ thing, and that's what they will try and grip into some form of, you know, divide and conquer and false information.
I mean, they've
Yeah, I
literally...
do believe we need to get better at making sure that I mean, all we have to do is keep replaying the parties. That's all you have to do, just to remind people of what they did, because that is the one thing that infuriates people. So I don't know. We'll have to keep going. I actually had a conversation recently with somebody who owns a business which manufactures all around the world ventilation things. And over the years, we've had huge rows about Brexit because he voted Brexit. And he was convinced it was going to be marvellous. And the recent conversation was, you know, he was absolutely... and realised, you know, that it isn't what he thought it was going to be. And I think there's a lot of people like that who have voted Conservative and believed in Brexit because they thought it was, you know, good for Britain and all those sort of things, who are now realising that the world isn't what they thought they were. And it is a big step for them to vote for another party, and it really need to give them that sort of, make it easier, or hope they stay at home. It's one or the other. But the tactical voting really does that, because the responsibility is taken away from them, and it's kind of like, oh, I'm going to do what this tactical voting website tells me to do. And I think it's, you know, that is really an important job that we all have to do, is to make sure that those tactical voting information is everywhere. Absolutely everywhere.
And also accurate, because I believe the Tories are actually setting up fake tactical voting websites to try and give incorrect information to people.
Well,
so
we've got Carol Vorderman on our team, so that's
yeah, we have, but it wouldn't put it past them, because didn't they have like a fake fact check site before or something like that?
They've changed that.
They do everything. They're doing everything they can, and you know, like voter ID. I mean, that's backfired maybe slightly on them. You know, changing the mayor elections to first past the post. I mean, you know, anything that they can do just to try and you know, maintain that upper hand. I find it really quite worrying. You know,
for me, the crazy thing is that they're not even hiding it. Like, they're literally saying we're trying to game the system. Jacob Rees-Mogg literally went on TV and said, partially they try and gerrymander, often find that their clever schemes come back to bite them, as dare I say we found when we insisted on voter ID. Literally saying we tried to rig UK elections. Like, it's not even it's not a debate anymore. They are corrupt politicians.
Absolutely, 100%. And their little local newspapers that they were doing in constituencies, you know, that looked like an old local newspaper. It doesn't really say Conservative on them or anything. They're just such this. They'll do anything they can to cheat and stay in power. So
proper underhand, isn't it?
Yeah,
proper underhand.
We've all got lots to look forward to.
Luckily, people like us have got the stomach for it, haven't we?
Yeah.
We have.
Is there anything anyone else wants to say, Femi or Liz, before
anything you're up to you want to promote just now, or just give us the last few words?
Okay. It would be great if everyone could follow. I'm trying to build my YouTube channel. I've spent so long on Twitter, and I've now discovered YouTube. So if you can find me on YouTube, that would be great. Liz Webster, Save British Farming, #Save British Farming. And perhaps you can put a link in the thing.
We will put.
I'll put links to all your stuff in it. Don't worry about that. Your YouTube's doing really well, actually, Liz.
Oh, thank you. I'm trying to force. I don't like talking to myself in the camera, and I'm trying to force myself to do it. It doesn't come naturally, I can tell you, but I'm pushing myself to do it. So my focus is going there rather. I mean, doing bits on Twitter as well, but I think the spoken content is good, and and helpful, and it's also hitting a completely different audience. So which is good. So yeah, if anyone.
Love the videos when you're out on the street asking people's opinion on Brexit. Absolutely brilliant.
I know. I'm going to be doing some more of those.
Right.
Yeah, watch this space. We're actually going to go down and do some in Cardiff, in fact. So my home, and so yes, we're going to do that probably in March.
Excellent.
I love
that.
One of my favourite videos of yours, Femi, is where was you in Paris and you did that?
Yes, I was in Paris. Yeah. I was speaking to some French people and asking them what they thought of Brexit. As for me, in terms of plugging, literally just the same as Liz. I moved over to YouTube as well. So if you can find me over there, find me.
It's a place to be with Mr. Musk in charge, isn't it? All right. Well, thank you.
I don't know if it's a secret, but before we go, is F politics, Femi politics, or fuck politics?
You'll never know.
Okay, I didn't think you'd tell me.
Make up your own mind on that one. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Sorry about the couple of technical hitches at the beginning on our first show, but we really appreciate you coming on. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Take care. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye. Please remember to click like, follow, subscribe, share, and we will see you next time.
Rejoin.